he took an interest in everyone. Like when I look at his television shows, I could see he greets everyone, warms them up, with a joke here or just a nice pleasantry. But within a few minutes, it seems like he gets right to the heart of the issue. He talks about things that are happening in our lives. And I know for me, I just found that Fulton Sheen, he was like this new parish priest that came into my life. And I think people would watch him on television and say, he's a priest that I can identify with. Yes, I know he's a bishop, but he's talking about sin. He's talking about virtue. He's talking about problems in society. And he's pointing to Christ in a way that I can relate to. And I think that's what it was. His presentation was very relatable. It wasn't impossible. It was a doable plan. And I think this is where he gave us hope. And, he mentioned the struggles that many people go through. And he said, we all have crosses. They're all custom made. But if we unite our cross to Christ, we will have the patience to endure it. So he gave us hope. The priest is someone who brings Jesus to the people and in turn brings the people to Jesus. And I think this is what Fulton Sheen did so well. He brought Jesus to us, shared about his life. He always mentioned about Christ in his programs, his addresses, but he in turn brought us to Jesus. And that's the beauty of Fulton Sheen, being a priest, that gift. And he brought hundreds of thousands of souls to Jesus, if not millions. And so I think that's the great description of a priest. A priest brings Jesus to the people and in turn brings the people to Jesus.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I know you have several books that you've edited with Fulton Sheen's snippets. Can you go into that and then share some of your favorite Sheen books?
Sure, absolutely. I recommend the book, The Priest Is Not His Own, to all men that are out there. We are called to be priest of our domestic church, to be that priest, prophet, and king that helps to teach the faith to our children, to be good husbands to our wives. And there's stuff in the book, The Priest Is Not His Own, that has helped me as what I call a domestic priest, priest of my own little family, the priest in prayer, the priest and his mother. So it's funny, but I do recommend that men especially read the book, The Priest Is Not His Own, because I think the world would be a better place if we had more good priests. And sometimes we have to be those domestic priests. One of the best compliments I get, and it happens a lot, is people say, "Are you a priest? Are you a priest?" And so I go, "Oh, thank you. Well, I'm not a priest that wears a collar. I have a priesthood through my baptism, right? But the graces of my baptism. But it's kind of neat. But I think we need to be more priestly, but on the holy side, that's for sure. But again, Victor.
Yeah, it's such a unique thing. I'm so glad we had the year of St. Joseph. That was super helpful for me because being patient is very hard with young kids, especially, right? It's always a challenge. But I looked so much to St. Joseph, and I always think of how, like, the way I carry myself will have such a great impact on my kids, right? And such a great impact on how they see God. We've all heard the things where all these people that have such a hard time, accepting the love of God had such a hard time accepting the love of their father. Maybe they didn't have a father, or he didn't, show his love in the right way, or was abusive or whatever. But it's so powerful to have that. So I really believe if we're going to change the world, we need to have good dads, because those good dads are going to raise those good future priests and nuns and fathers and mothers. And that's just how we do it. We're in a society where fatherhood has been mocked and emasculated. And that's where we just really need to look to Jesus. And I think a priest is not, I haven't read that. I've started it, but I definitely need to finish it.
Yeah, it's beautiful that you talked about St. Joseph. And I know Fulton Sheen talks about St. Joseph in the book, The World's First Love. But, I love St. Joseph too. And again, he's been a go-to saint for me since my early 20s. And again, when my wife and I were in our pre-marriage course 38 years ago, the formators put all the men in one room and the ladies in another room. And the talk that was given was about adopting St. Joseph as your role model to all the new husbands to be. And I remember, I guess, praying one day to St. Joseph, and I said, how are we going to make this happen? And he says, I want you to pretend that I'm making you an offer. I'm going to build an addition on my house and let you move in with me. That St. Joseph's home, where he has the Blessed Virgin Mary and our Blessed Lord living with him, he's saying, I'm going to build an addition onto my room, onto my house for you and your family. I want you to live with me. I want you to live under my rule, my direction, and have access to my son and my good wife, the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I took him up on his proposal. And I always felt that I'd live in the house of St. Joseph. And I have this addition on, and that I have access to Joseph, Our Lady, and our Lord. And my children have all benefited from this being in the house of Joseph. In fact, we always call our home, Nazareth. And I live up in the northern climes of Canada, and so we call it Nazareth North. But again, putting ourselves under the protection of St. Joseph, the holy example of St. Joseph, and to just know that his role was to, of course, assist our Lord and Our Lady in their plan. And so we all can help God in his plan by being friends to St. Joseph, being friends to Our Lady and our Lord. So again, just the tip for everyone, go to Joseph and accept his offer of letting him build an addition onto his house and you living with him under his rule. And it'll go a long way. It really does. I love St. Joseph. So there you go. I saw a great need to republish Fulton Sheen's works. When I started to research his 66 books, I started to say, well, that one's out of circulation. That one is missing. That one is beautiful, but should be republished. And so I took the interest in saying, can I find a publisher who will help me with this mission of reintroducing these books to the world? And so my friends at Sophia Institute Press, entertained the idea, and we got together and we compiled what I call Fulton Sheen's Legacy Series. Because when you look at his 66 books, he had some themes that he wrote about. And I noticed that he had like 9 books that he wrote on the 7 last words. Because every year, Fulton Sheen would talk about the 7 last words and change the theme. One year he talked about the 7 parts of the Mass and the 7 last words. And that book was Calvary in the Mass. One year he talked about the 7 deadly sins and the 7 last words. And that was Victory over Vice. And another year he talked about virtue and the 7 last words, and the Beatitudes and the 7 last words, and Our Lady's 7 words in Scripture and the 7 last words. So it was just beautiful. I'm going, hey, he's got this pattern where every year he writes about the cross and the 7 last words. And so I put all of those books together in a compilation and called it The Cries of Jesus from the Cross, because these are his 7 cries and how they look at it all these different ways. And so Sophia Institute has published that book in 2018 for me. And again, it's on its 7th printing. It continues to sell out. It's always one of the top selling books. So again, it was just an idea to say the power of the cross, the power of the 7 last words, we got to do that. And so I put together that book. And then everybody's asking me, well, what's your next book you're going to do? And I did a book on prayer, because Fulton Sheen's Holy Hour, his writings on the Mass, the Our Father, just beautiful Stations of the Cross, all of these things, because Fulton Sheen's saying we need to pray. And he had a little wartime prayer book. He had a Holy Hour prayer book. Fulton Sheen was always making these little prayer books. So I put together all of Sheen's writings on prayer. And that book's called Lord, Teach Us to Pray. So a book on the cross, a book on prayer. And then people asked me, what's next? And I said, well, his writings on the sacraments. Fulton Sheen wrote about the sacraments and marriage. The book 3 to Get Married is beautiful. And his book on the sacraments is even more beautiful. And so we put that together into one book called Archbishop Sheen's Book of Sacraments. And then, of course, he wrote so much on God's love, the famous saying, God love you. So we took Sheen's writings on love and called it the greatest commandment. Again, he wrote a book in 1944 called Love One Another. and he wrote the book God Love You. So we put those two together. And my latest fifth book, the last book I wrote just was called War and Peace. It was Sheen's writings during the war years, because war is all around us. We see, atheism, communism, materialism, all these isms, socialism. They're just pervading society. And people are saying, is there someone who can write about this and talk about this? Well, Fulton Sheen is the man to write and talk about all the isms. And so we put together all of his writings during the war years and called it War and Peace, because Fulton Sheen's name actually in Gaelic, Fulton in Gaelic means war, and Sheen in Gaelic means peace. So his actual name means war and peace, and of course his Irish background and stuff. So those are the 5 books I put together with Sophia Institute Press, which are theme books. They're anthologies. But again, I wanted to make it easy. Instead of buying 66 little books, you can buy just a few, books that are collections. And so the power of the cross, the power of prayer, the power of marriage, the sacraments, the power of God's love, and the answer to peace and overcoming war, all from Fulton Sheen. So those you can find through Sophia Institute Press. And I know their website is sophiainstitute.com. And to all of your listeners, of course, we want to extend a 25% discount. And there's always those promo codes when you check out at websites. If you use the promo code Sheen25, you'll receive a 25% discount, not just on Sheen books, but anything that Sophia carries. So I just thanks to them. They're so generous. Wow. And so there you go. So, but those are the 5 anthologies that I edited and compiled. And there's other books that I've self-published on Amazon, and you'll find them there too. But again, I think I really just indebted to Sophia Institute Press and the work that they do to republish these books by Sheen. So I tell you, they are touching souls and changing lives, which is so beautiful.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I saw Virtue Over Vice on Amazon. That's one that you did?
Yeah. So what happens, Victory
That is
Over
an amazing book. You mentioned that earlier. I remember I think I read almost all of it while I was on a plane.
Yes.
And I was amazed. It was just incredible. Yeah. And it's awesome because when you listen to Fulton Sheen enough, when you're reading, you can hear him talking.
Yes.
And it's really neat for that to happen. And so go check that out. I'll have to link that in the video.
Yeah. Victory Over Vice, 1939 book. Sophia Institute Press carries it. And again, it's included in the first anthology, Lord Teach Us to Pray. It's one of the 7 books I put in there. But you can see where Sheen was being very pastoral. So in 1939, he does Victory Over Vice, 7 Deadly Sins, The Antidote, 7 Last Words. Then the following year, he says, now, I want you to practice 7 virtues, the theological virtues, the cardinal virtues, and applied them to the 7 last words on the cross. So he gave you the remedy. So this is how you overcome vice. This is how you practice virtue. And it's with the Lord as your inspiration. So, and again, I did a combo book on Amazon where I put the 2 books together, because everybody's saying, help me overcome vice, but help me practice virtue. It's important. So those 2 books, Victory Over Vice and the 7 Virtues, are great reads. And like you say, each book only takes 2 hours to read. They're 100 pages, quick read, but they change your life. They really will.
That's great. Do you recommend any from TAN or the other publishers?
Oh, yeah. So now, I know that you have a beautiful relationship with TAN Books, in that you have I think a special promo code that you give all of your supporters to when they're on TAN Books and checking out, that they put in the promo code and they receive the 15% discount. And with TAN Books, Fulton Sheen, it's been a mainstay.
Use the promo code The Joy of the Faith at checkout for the TAN Books.
They've got the 5, they call it the Signature Series. And it's 5 books that I think of how popular they are, especially today. His book on communism and the conscience of the West, The Way to Happiness. Again, just these beautiful, they picked I like to say, the ones that people desire even today. They're saying, what can I get? And so I say, buy the whole series. They're 5 beautiful books. And of course, Fulton Sheen wrote a book on, we put it together, but it's a collection of his talks during a mission he gave in Ireland for St. Therese. It's called St. Therese, A Treasured Love Story, because Fulton Sheen was actually a third order Carmelite. Priests can be, third order Dominicans, third order Franciscans, third order Carmelites. The priest can be third order things, and he loved Carmel. He loved St. Therese, especially St. Therese of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. And this is why I have a great devotion to the Holy Face, because Fulton Sheen, of course, shared always about St. Therese of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. But again, he was a Carmelite, and but that book that's available through TAN, called A Treasured Love Story, is a must read. I always say he will help you to understand the simple way, the beautiful way of St. Therese, and how we can all follow that. So again, it's great to see one saint talk about another saint.
Yeah.
And so
Treasure and Clay, if you really dive into Fulton Sheen and you want to learn more, read that. I've really enjoyed reading that book so much.
Right. Yeah, I love the Holy Hour prayer book. Again, it's available on Amazon. You'll see it. There's a beautiful picture of the monstrance from the altar in Peoria. So you'll see it, Holy Hour prayer book, Fulton Sheen. It's got beautiful meditations in there. Fulton Sheen wanted us to go into the Holy Hour prepared. Bring the scriptures with you. Bring meditations. He kind of gives everyone 10 reasons to make a holy hour, different insights that he has, because of course he did the holy hour for all those years. And so it's good to bring a nice booklet with you into the holy hour, and not just to the holy hour, but even to read at home, some beautiful meditation. So the Holy Hour prayer book is one that I recommend, along with Victory Over Vice. Those are my two favorites.
Go to Heaven?
Go to Heaven is a book that isn't really published that much. It's one of those ones where sometimes a publisher will do a run on them and not republish it. So Go to Heaven is a good book, but it's hard to find. It's not what I call in mass distribution. There's about 30 books that Fulton Sheen wrote that everybody knows. The World's First Love, Life of Christ, of course, the anthologies that I've put together, and Stan books, the ones they're distributing. So, the Gory Publications has a number of books. Ignatius Press carries 7 or 8 Sheen titles. So each one of the major publishers carry a half dozen to a dozen books of Fulton Sheen. But there's some other books that are a little bit more obscure that are harder to find, but are republished and maybe not as popular.
What are the best Fulton Sheen quotes?
Well, there's 4 of them that really sing to my heart if we've got time. But, the first quote, of course, we just mentioned, unless souls are saved, nothing is saved. That is so true. And I think it's part of what I like to say is my battle cry. It's about saving souls, including my own. Yes, I want my children to get to heaven, my grandchildren to get to heaven, my wife to get to heaven, but I want others to get to heaven too. And so that mission of saving souls is so important. Another quote that really touches my heart is when Fulton Sheen said, there's all these crazy things going on in the world. And sometimes I look at the 6 o'clock news and say, oh, can't believe that happened. I can't believe that happened. The evil that's out there. But he said, a world capable of putting God on a cross and killing him is capable of doing anything. And I thought about that. It just sobers me up thinking, yeah, so when you see those crazy things happen, remember 2,000 years ago, they put God on a tree and put him to death. So the world is capable of doing these evils again and again and again. And so it just helps me to understand evil and to know that our Lord won the victory over evil, and that the power of his cross will redeem the world. So that little thing is very important. Of course, the great quote I love is, I don't want my life to be my own. I want it to be Christ. And Fulton Sheen said that so many times, and it's true. A lot of times we want our lives to be our own. I want to control everything. I want to have my say. But to just think of Fulton Sheen, I don't want my life to be my own. I want it to be Christ. And so that is so important. And the last quote that I think of is, because I have a great love for the holy face of Jesus. I love sharing the devotion to the Holy Face, be it through the Shroud of Turin, or the Veil of Veronica. I love having this encounter of presenting the Holy Face. And Fulton Sheen said, at the end of your life, you're going to either come in contact with two faces, the glorious face of our Lord or the face of Satan. And both those faces will just say one word, mine, mine. Do you want to hear the Lord say mine or Satan say mine? And so it's that very chilling reality that we will see God face to face, hopefully one day, and be with him for all paradise. Or there is a chance that we may be faced with Satan and his face and face the torments of hell. So very sobering. So this whole idea of whose face will you see at the end? And hopefully it's the face of Christ. We say, Lord, show us your face and we shall be saved. So those are the four quotes that ring true with me and Fulton Sheen again. And for others, everyone has their own Sheen quote, but those are the four that are in my life every day.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's so interesting because you would listen to those quotes and be like, there's no way that guy is popular today, right? When he says such like hard truths. But Fulton Sheen had such a great ability to relate to people and like a joy in his being, you know? So I think that's something that we all need to realize is that, you know, I think so often in the church, people are like, oh, we don't want to say, you know, talk about hell or Satan, right? On the one end, and the other ones that are like, that's all they want to talk about. You know, Sheen obviously said the hard truths, but he also had like a great joy that resonated to everyone else that people could see. And I think that's what we're called to do is we're called to look to heaven as our goal and then see how we can get other people there. And so much of that is being able to engage with the world and to learn things, to be able to relate to other people, because especially today in this post-Christian society, if we just went up with those Fulton Sheen words, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Right. But if we can bring them in through like great friendships and then introduce Sheen, that's just like, wow, really hard hitting, but also like he engaged with the people of the time. Right. Won an Emmy for his show. I mean, it was just really amazing what he did. And I'm so grateful for that example, because there was a time in my own faith where I was just so focused on prayer and, you know, reaching souls that I'd kind of lost the ability to socialize with people that weren't Catholic, you know, or even Christians. Of course, we could talk about the Bible and stuff like that, but it was very hard for me to just relate to the average person on the street. And I was like, wow, I need to, just like Paul says, to be all things to all people. Right. And I think that's a call for us today, that we can't just kind of like hide away and, you know, obviously our salvation is most important, right? But we need to be able to reach others, right? Our number one goal is to get to heaven. And our number two is to bring as many people there as possible with us. So yes. I'm really grateful for that example, because right. you see a lot of that today.
Yeah. And I think of Fulton Sheen, if you listen to his old radio addresses, he would speak to Jews, Catholics, and Protestants and mention them by name. I mean, every week he said, I'm challenging everyone to make a holy hour. Now, Catholics, I want you to go to Mass and spend an extra half hour after Mass with the Lord to make your hour. But Protestants and Jews, take the scriptures with you. Spend time with the Lord, meditating on God's holy word. But carve that hour of the day out. And if you have to break it up in 15-minute segments, do that. But spend an hour with the Lord, meditating on God's great love. And again, he was transcending, you know, culturally. It didn't matter if you were Jew, Protestant, or Catholic. He was saying, get to know God, pray, you know, these beautiful things. And that's why he was so respected by so many. But there's a famous quote. He says that heaven is built on a hill. You need to climb. You need to climb. You just don't coast into heaven. You got to climb and bring those souls with you too. But again, he was a man that encouraged all of us to pray. But I think many people remember his holy hour and his preaching on the holy hour and how important that was, and how for 62 years, not only did he talk the talk, he walked the walk, and that he never missed that opportunity to pray with our Lord for an hour each day. And sometimes I think Fulton Sheen did multiple holy hours in a day, but for 62 years, he never missed. So great example for all of us to be steadfast and dedicated to prayer.
Oh, yeah. And think about all the priests that you've heard talk about their holy hour and how that has changed their life. I mean, obviously, Father Mike Schmitz talks about it. All focused missionaries do the holy hour, right? Because of Archbishop Sheen. There's an exorcist talking about how he did the holy hour. It's a really great thing. Now, Al, you travel all over North America to share Sheen. Can you tell us how many places you visited and what people have resonated most with when you share on Archbishop Sheen?
Right. Well, I think everyone has a Sheen story. So it doesn't matter if I'm speaking in California, New York City, throughout Canada, Texas, Florida. It's always the same. Everyone comes up to me and says, "Oh, I read this Sheen book and it changed my life." Or I met him in person and he was so kind. It's just that I just felt I was in the presence of a saint. I get these stories all the time about conversions of people who were lukewarm in the faith, but somehow Fulton Sheen just invigorated their faith, gave them the reason to come back. I meet many converts who say Fulton Sheen is the reason why I became a Catholic. So everyone has a Sheen story. My Sheen story started when I was 48 years old. I never watched Fulton Sheen as a child. I never knew of him, but I found him later in my life. And so again, what's really just heartwarming is these beautiful Sheen stories, and everyone has one. And so that's where I know this man has touched the lives of millions of people. So it doesn't matter where I am in America or Canada. It's the same thing, the Sheen moment, the Sheen story. And some people have multiple stories to share.
So you were 48. How did you find Sheen? What was it that you saw? Like, what hit you?
All right. I'm the father of 3 adult children now and a grandfather to 6. But there's that moment in your life where you have to drop your daughter off to college. And so, so I was dropping my eldest daughter to a little Catholic college in Barry's Bay, Ontario, called Our Lady Seat of Wisdom College. And I was a good dad. I was making sure my daughter was settled into her dorm, kind of protective custody. And my good wife was in the library of the school looking at the books. And there was a box of free books that the library had put out because they were making room for the new editions and discarding the old tattered books. And my wife picked up a book from Fulton Sheen called Peace of Soul, a book that he wrote in 1949. And I said to my good wife when we got back into the car, I said, "Oh, I noticed you've got a bunch of books there." And she goes, "Oh, they were free. They're free books." And I said, "Well, what are they?" And she says, "Oh, this one's from Fulton Sheen." And I said, "Well, read me some of that book." Oh, we got a 5-hour drive to get back home. And she opened up the first page of that book, and the line was simply, "Unless souls are saved, nothing is saved." And I heard that line, "Unless souls are saved, nothing is saved." I said, who talks in that language anymore? And it just struck me. And I said, I have to read more of this great author, this Fulton Sheen, who I never knew of. And I went back home and Googled Fulton Sheen and saw that he wrote 66 books. I said, wow, where do I begin? And I looked at the one title that caught my eye. It was a book called Victory Over Vice. And it was a book he penned in 1939 of how to overcome the 7 deadly sins through the wisdom of the 7 last words our Lord spoke from the cross. And when I read that little 100-page book, there was that encounter with that new parish priest that understood me and gave me a roadmap of how to conduct myself, how to deal with the 7 deadly sins, and to know there's an answer to them. And he really gave me hope. Sometimes we struggle with sin and we think we'll never get out of that sin or that habit. But yet Fulton Sheen gives us the remedy, I like to say, of how to overcome the sins. And that, of course, is our Lord's great homily from Calvary, the Seven Last Words, a great sermon. So that little book just ignited a spark in my soul to just keep reading Sheen. And within 2 years, I think I read 24 of his books. I just kept consuming Fulton Sheen's books. And I just knew that, again, I needed to share his writings with the world. And I've been on radio up in Canada for many years, and I at a local community radio station, and I said to their station manager, could I put a Fulton Sheen show on the air? And was able to get some of his old recordings, and we started putting him out on the radio airwaves. And I tell you, people called into the station saying, it's great to hear Fulton Sheen. I remember when he came to town and, all of a sudden I had this great awakening, but it was that one book, Peace of Soul, and those words, unless souls are saved, nothing is saved, that started it all. And I thank my good wife for being a thrifty wife, picking up that free book, because it started me on this journey, this path. And so I tell you, we can go on for hours talking about these little Sheen miracles that happen.
There's been a lot of discussion with the Latin Mass and, Traditionis Custodes and stuff like that. A lot of people look to Fulton Sheen and they heard him say, oh, well, the Mass, a lot of people think that the Mass should be in Latin because it's mysterious, but we don't need that, and different things like that. Could you share some of your knowledge on his perspective on that?
Yeah, I get invited to all the different podcasts, the traditionally minded podcast, the mainstream churches podcast, and they always ask me my opinion of Fulton Sheen and tradition. And I say, you have to look at what Fulton Sheen was experiencing through his life. Yes, he was a bishop, and he went to the Second Vatican Council, and his contributions were admired. And of course, he was very enthusiastic about the council because he was enthusiastic about the church and its mission. And of course, his years of promoting the faith, being the head of the propagation of the faith. And so the Vatican II Council ended, and then Fulton Sheen went to Rochester to, take his 3-year there. But, the new Mass didn't really start to take off till 69, 70. Well, Fulton Sheen was retired. He retired as a Bishop of Rochester in 1969. So he wasn't really part of the implementation of the new Mass, the new program. He was in New York City, retired, of course, trying to give priestly retreats and do things like that. But because he had so many pictures with the popes, they always think he was chummy with the popes. Well, they were trying to get a photo with him, I think, because he was even more popular than some of the popes, I think, sometimes. But still, I think it's what he wrote and what he said about tradition. And you'll see that he wrote beautiful writings on the Mass. He has the 2 books, Calvary and the Mass, This is the Mass. You read his books on These Are the Sacraments. You read his catechism series, and you know that he's friends of tradition. And I think, privately, I believe he prayed the traditional Latin Mass, as many older priests did. Remember, Fulton Sheen spent all those years only praying the Latin Mass. And then there was that short period with the new Mass. So a lot of retired priests just pray the traditional Latin Mass because that's what they know, and they found it to be very beautiful. So I think of, when I look at Fulton Sheen and his writings and what he said and what he wrote, he's a friend of tradition. And this is why you see many bloggers featuring Fulton Sheen, and especially his Eucharistic holy hours, his love for things that are holy. That's a friend of tradition, that's for sure. And I don't think, that you will fault him for being enthusiastic about the church's mission, but sometimes you can misinterpret what he says, or you kind of read into something that's not true. But I think at the end of the day, I look at the evidence that's presented, and I like to say he'd be very favorable towards the traditional Latin Mass, but because it points to Jesus. And that was his goal. He said, I want to get you to Jesus. And if sloppily said Mass, these clown masses or whatever, that doesn't point to Jesus. And so Fulton Sheen, I'm sure, would say, no, none of this. If it points us to Jesus, then I'm with it. It gets my blessing. It gets my vote. And I think that's what Fulton Sheen always did. He wanted to make sure that we all got to heaven, and that we were always mindful of the abuses that are present, to be that watchdog, to be discerning, to practice the virtue of prudence, do what's right. And I think a lot of times we maybe look at an old interview and say, oh, he didn't seem to say the right thing, or, we heard something about him on a Tuesday in Rochester, but it's what he did and what he said for all those years. And I think that's what speaks the volumes is not the one-offs, that interview or this comment, but the whole package. And again, the church declared him venerable. So all of those books that people criticize, the church is saying, no, they're authentic. They got nihil obstats, imprimaturs, all of this stuff. It's church approved. So, and I always say, who am I to question a man who has all these degrees, who taught at the Catholic University of America for 22 years, who was a priest, a bishop, an archbishop? I'm not going to go against Fulton Sheen and his wisdom and his gifts. So I will side with tradition on this one and do that. So I like to say Fulton Sheen is a friend of the church, and he wants the salvation of our souls. That's his interest. And the traditional movement, I'm a fan, because it does help draw me closer to Jesus. And I would always give a vote for tradition. I'd say to people, you may not, I still don't understand the Latin Mass. I go to the Latin Mass from time to time, and I'm lost, but I'm not lost in the mystery of what's happening there, that our Lord is coming down on the altar and he's feeding us. We're receiving him, body, blood, soul, and divinity. The beauty of the traditional Latin Mass is something that I marvel at. I don't understand it, but I marvel at it. And I know it's a good thing. So again, you'll find me everywhere, I think. But and again, Fulton Sheen was by ritual. Remember this, like he celebrated the Byzantine rite because he said, the church breathes with two lungs. It's not just it's the Eastern and the Western. And of course, he learned the Byzantine rite because of so many marginalized people that are persecuted. Like, again, you look at these war-torn countries, and again, these Eastern rites and all these other rites, they're in countries that have persecution and difficulties. And so it was his way of helping them out with that too, that they're people too, and that their right is just as valid as the other rights.
You know how he learned the other right?
Well, of course, he's a great student. He's a great study. Like when you think of the volumes of things that Fulton Sheen had to learn, languages. I mean, he spoke French, German, Italian, English. Like he had to learn those languages, and of course, Latin too, right? And of course, to learn how to celebrate the Byzantine rite, he studied it, he knew it, and of course, practiced it. And then, of course, was given the faculties to be by ritual. And many people see the pictures of Fulton Sheen in his Byzantine garb. And a lot of that is actually at the Sheen Museum. For people who visit Peoria and visit the tomb of Fulton Sheen, can go and visit the museum, and you'll see his Byzantine garb, his vestments, his mitre, all of those beautiful things. And they all have beautiful sewn-in icons of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And she is actually the patroness of the Diocese of Peoria. And so it's a beautiful connection. And Fulton Sheen's body arrived on the feast day of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Wow. And so there's something there. Fulton Sheen loves Our Lady. And there's a sign there. Go to Mama. Go to the Blessed Virgin Mary. So there you go.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Did you know if Fulton Sheen ever met Padre Pio, or if they ever had any correspondence?
I can't say I can't show you a picture of that, but I was told that they had met. I mean, you hear all these stories you always think Fulton Sheen, because he was all over the world, and of course in Rome many times, and of course being a Monsignor, a bishop, he was in Rome, it seemed constantly, but I'm sure he would have met many saints and many influential people. Again, we'll only know when they show us the records in heaven, but I wouldn't say no to that. I would say there was a good possibility, but I have not seen a picture or read a testimony that would say that the two were friendly. But I do know that Fulton Sheen knew many popes and bishops, and of course, Bishop Pope Benedict XVI remembers Fulton Sheen from the Vatican Council. St. John Paul II used to listen to Fulton Sheen's talks and practice and learn the English language through Fulton Sheen. So there's many popes that remember Fulton Sheen and speak highly of him. So he's touched a lot of lives, met a lot of people, and influenced a lot of people too.
That's great. Wow. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. To learn more about you, bishopsheentoday.com. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I named the site bishopsheentoday.com because we need Bishop Sheen today. I need him. I mean, my children need him. My grandchildren need him. And the world needs Bishop Sheen. So what better title to give a website than bishopsheentoday.com? And there you'll find hundreds of videos, hundreds of hours of audio recordings, all the books that are available through the different publishers. It's your one-stop hub for everything Fulton Sheen. And you can drop me a line and ask me a question or send me a comment. But again, if you want to know more about Fulton Sheen, go to bishopsheentoday.com. That
is great. Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Hope you all have a blessed day. Please like and share this video because this is a great one for people to hear of. I love sharing Bishop Sheen and it's touched so many people. So have a blessed day and God love you.
Friends, oddly enough, the best way to give you some idea of what we are talking about tonight is to give you the definition of a prune. A prune is a worried plum. So I'm going to say something about worry, or more properly about fear. A little girl went to her daddy once and said, "Daddy, are you afraid of cows?" "No." "Are you afraid of snakes?" "No." "Are you afraid of long woolly worms?" "No." "Daddy, you aren't afraid of anything but Mom, are you?" Well, what is fear that so much concerns our modern world? Fear actually is related to love, as all the passions are. And fear is the emotion that arises in us when there is a danger facing something or someone that we love. And the mother has fear for her children. We will talk about various kinds of fear. First of all, fears in the ego, and then fears outside of the ego, but principally dealing with effects. One could give the kinds of fears. Now, first of all, in the ego, or in the self, one of the first effects of fears, and this seems very strange, is laziness. Well, how is laziness related to fear? Well, a person so loves his own physical comfort and ease that he's afraid of work. Very simple. I heard of an old couple down south. The husband was leaning up against the house, facing out into the road. The wife was in a rocker, but she was facing the house, in the porch. And she said, "What's that noise out in front?" He said, "That's Jim McComb's funeral going by." Many at it? Yes. He said, "About 20 hacks." My, she said, "I'd love to see that funeral. I wish I was turned around the other way." Then, another effect of fear is gambling. Here I'm speaking of professional gamblers. A professional gambler is one who is afraid of the responsibilities of life. And so he lives in a world of fantasy and dream in which he's always just about to make a great fortune. Two of them were coming home from the racetrack one day, and one of them said, "You know, today I broke even. And boys, did I need it." Another effect of fear is hypochondria. There are some people who make themselves mentally sick. Actually, there are cases on record, for example, of men saying, "You know, if I had not been sick, I would have been one of the greatest tennis players in America." Or if I had not been sick, I would have written the finest novel that was ever produced in America. Or if I were not sick, I would have been a millionaire, and so forth. Now, it's very likely that he became sick, made himself really sick, in order to avoid facing the responsibility of his own boasts. In the San Francisco earthquake, there were 30 people who hadn't walked in 30 years, got up and walked. Then another effect of fear is lying. Some who have a feeling of deep inferiority discover that by boastfulness and exaggeration that they convince others of their importance. I know of a little girl who was always lying. She was given a St. Bernard dog once. I once had a St. Bernard dog. He had the instinct of a lap dog and the instep of a rhinoceros. Well, this little girl was given a St. Bernard dog, and she went out and told all the neighbors she had been given a lion. And her mother called her and said, "Now listen, I told you not to lie. You go upstairs, tell God you're sorry. Promise God that you will not lie again." So she went upstairs and said her prayers, and when she came down, the mother said, "Did you say your prayers? And did you tell God you were sorry?" And the little girl said, "Yes, I did. And God said that sometimes He finds it hard to tell a dog from a lion." Then another effect is what is called shamefacedness, or red-facedness, embarrassing moments. Take, for example, the woman taken in adultery, mentioned in the Gospel. Here there is a fear of having one's reputation and honor either destroyed or exploited. I once knew of a man who was seated next to a very charming lady at a banquet table. He had just met her at the table, and for want of something better to say, he saw someone in the far end of the room whom he knew, and calling the attention of the lady, he said, "See that man down there?" "Yes," said the lady. He said, "You know, I hate him." And she, in righteous indignation, said, "I beg to tell you, that is my husband." And he said, "Madam, that's why I hate him." Not everybody gets out of difficulties quite so easily. Now, these are the effects of fear in the ego. What happens to us? Now, there are other effects of fear because of what happens to us. Take, for example, something that happens to us because of its magnitude. Sunset in the Mediterranean, the sight of the Alps, or the two infinities that always made Pascal wonder, the infinitely little and the infinitely great. The effect of magnitude is to create in one wonder. Wonder is the beginning of all philosophy. Aristotle tells us that. It's the beginning of all philosophy because it makes us ask. No, my angel needn't bother now washing away this, because I suppose he wondered why we got over here, but we got a little signal to move. I was facing the wrong camera. Then another effect of fear is when something is very unexpected. Take, for example, the explosion of an atomic bomb, or something unexpected that's happening to me now. These two clocks are not exactly alike, and I'm wondering just on what second I'm going to finish. So if you'll give me a signal. So will the angel flutter around me and tell me sometime which clock I'm to follow? such as the explosion of an atomic bomb creates stupor. And the third effect, and this is very important, is where there is something that happens to us in which we feel helpless. And that creates what is known as anxiety. There is a tremendous disproportion between our own resources and the hostile forces that oppose us. This anxiety is rather normal, particularly in the physical order. And here we leave these old descriptions of, they are very old. I might tell you that I got all of this out of a book that was 700 years old. But there's a new kind of anxiety. And now I'm just a little anxious about my angel cleaning my blackboard, and as soon as he does, I will come back to you to tell you about the new kind of anxiety. This new kind of anxiety is very modern, and it is the anxiety with which many psychiatrists and psychoanalysts deal. It is an anxiety that is rather abnormal than normal. The normal anxiety is something that makes us afraid because of what happens on the outside, that is to say, outside of us. The abnormal anxiety, and this is the very modern one, makes us fear because of something that happens inside of us. The first kind of anxiety is physical. The second kind of anxiety is mental or psychical. These are very normal fears. For example, fright during a thunderstorm, being chased by a bull on the farm, danger of being struck in traffic. But the new anxieties are coming from the inside of man himself, from whence they should never come. The result is too many modern minds are very much like this. This is the conscious part of their existence, and down here is the unconscious, and the unconscious is seething with all kinds of repressions. There are even coiled serpents in that unconscious and subconscious mind. They're constantly striving for some kind of release. There are many effects that are produced by this abnormal anxiety or fear, and of them we will mention three. The first is what is known as a compulsion neurosis. Did you ever hear about the woman who lived in a bed of neuroses? I'll give you a minute to get that. First of all, a compulsion neurosis is something that we are forced to do because we have not done what we ought to do. This is one of the very common manifestations of subjective anxiety. I could think of no better way to describe it than to take the description that was given by Shakespeare. You remember the great tragedy of Macbeth? And in that magnificent story, Lady Macbeth encourages her husband to murder the King Duncan while he sleeps, in order that he might seize the crown and be the king. When he does it, he's frightened and afraid. Lady Macbeth says to him, "Think not on these ways, for they will drive you mad. In other words, do not think of your guilt. Suppress it and repress it. Lady Macbeth then kills the grooms, smears them with her own blood, and she says to Macbeth, "Now my hands are your color, but I should shame to wear a heart so white," making fun of anyone who had a guilty conscience. Lady Macbeth's conscience is asleep while she is awake. There's so many in our world who are constantly repressing the sense of guilt. But while Lady Macbeth sleeps, her conscience is awake. And she walks in her sleep. She sees blood in her hands, at least she thinks she does. She says, "Will not all the perfumes of Arabia sweeten this little hand? Will not great Neptune's oceans wash away these stains? Nay, rather, they will the multitudinous seas incarnadine, turning the green one red." And for a quarter of an hour at a time she would wash her hands. That was a compulsion neurosis coming from the fear of punishment because of the guilt of murder. Instead of purifying her conscience, the compulsion neurosis came out in the washing of the hands, as it does in so many compulsion neuroses in our modern world. That's the first effect. And the second effect of this wrong, subjective fear and anxiety is terror. Terror is the fear that comes from being terrorized. Terror is something that seizes the persecutor. Whenever you find a man who has been cruel to others, he always lives in terror. I was talking to one of the greatest artists in the world, and I asked him when he came to America what he considered the most interesting face in America that he saw. And he mentioned the name of the then representative of the Soviet Union and the United Nations. He said, "His face intrigues me. If I were painting it, I should paint a skull." And we know that some of their representatives, when they leave our hotels in New York, leave sometimes their guns under the pillows, bullets in the night tables. Terror. Terror because they know they have taken the lives of many and have been responsible, and there's no blotting out a guilty conscience, though they deny both God and conscience and morality. And then finally there is horror, this modern thing of horror, or rather dread. Dread is the fear of nothingness. Think of how many there are in our world today who have no sense whatever of a plan of life. They are, if I may describe it, something like this. I'm telling you what, this is a ship. This is a mast of the ship. This is the water of the ship. This is a crow's nest. No respectable crow would ever be seen in it either. And that's the ladder going up to it, and here's my usual man, the only kind of man that I can draw. I'll get another art scholarship for this one. The modern man does not know where he's going. He's not certain of his destiny. This is a storm at sea, and he's always in danger of being thrown back into the nothingness from which he came. And so he lives in a terrible sense of dread. He's fearing the wrong things, our modern man. And much of modern culture is destined to try and suppress that dread. Sleeping tablets, opiates, constant love of pastime and pleasures, all these are attempted to suppress this awful gnawing feeling of nothingness and the dread of nothingness? Why is it that a cow never has dread? Pig never has a psychosis? A hen never has a neurosis? Why is it none of these things have dread? Simply because none of these things in lower creation, nothing below man, has a soul. It was born for the infinite. It takes eternity to make a man despair. And if they only knew it, as I said, they're fearing the wrong things. We used to fear God, then we began to fear fellow man. Now we begin to fear what? We begin to fear ourselves, something that we should never fear. How will they get out of it? They will get out of it by realizing that fear is the pathway to peace. But there are two kinds of fear. There's the servile fear and there's a filial fear. Servile fear is a fear of punishment, which they all have, a fear of judgment. The filial fear is a fear of reverence. For example, servile fear. The child disobeys the mother and goes to the mother and said, "Mommy, I'm sorry, I did wrong. Now I can't go to the picnic, can I?" And the other child just throws her arms around the mother's neck and cries and said, "Mommy, I'm sorry I hurt you." Servile fear, or the fear of punishment, or the dread, can be the starting point for filial fear or the fear of reverence. All who have dread have within themselves a longing. They all have misery. What they need and what they want is mercy. And if therefore they will face love itself, or perfect love casts out fear, then they will come indeed to someone whom they will love so much that they will be honest and good and just, not because they dread punishment, but simply because they have reverence for someone whom they love. No one will ever be good over a long period of time simply because he's told to keep a law. He will be good only because he would not want to hurt someone that he loves. Why be good? Because there comes to one the sight of wounded hands and riven feet. There comes to one a picture of one who has been hurt. And so we try to be good because we love God and we love him so much we do not want to hurt him. That is the end of fear. God love you.
Friends, apropos of improving the mind, you probably have often heard the question that newspapermen and journalists often ask people, namely, if you were shipwrecked on an island and could have only one book, which one would you choose? The best answer was given by G.K. Chesterton, who said he would like to have Thomas's Practical Guide to Shipbuilding. I heard of a man who had been reading so very much about cigarettes being a conditioning cause of cancer that he gave up reading. John, that was a second late. And there was a college boy who wrote home to his father and said, Dad, I'm going to save you a little money this year. You will not have to buy any more books for me. I've decided to take over last year's courses. One day some horsemen were crossing the desert, and they stopped at an oasis for a drink. And a voice out of nowhere spoke to them and said, fill your pockets with pebbles. Tomorrow you will be sad and glad. They obeyed the voice, and they filled their pockets with pebbles. And the next morning when they awoke, put their hands in their pockets, they found that the pebbles had turned into diamonds and rubies and emeralds of the most precious kind. They were glad, but they were also sad. They were glad that they had turned into jewels. They were sad that they had not taken more. And that's the way it is with education. We're very glad that we've had it. We're sad we didn't get more out of it. Did you know that there is a virtue called studiositas? In other words, studiousness. When we started to prepare this telecast, we went to Thomas Aquinas and read his treatise on studiousness. Now, studiousness, he said, is possible because the human mind is perfectible. In lower creation, there's not much perfection possible. For example, H2O can only take on 3 forms. It can be water, ice, and steam. Plants have greater variety, greater adaptability to temperature, to seasons, and the like. And animals have still more capacity for perfection due to their ability to move from place to place. Man is the greatest of all. Man, on account of his spiritual capacities of intellect and will, is able to get the whole universe into his own head. He therefore is a kind of a little world, a microcosmos. And due even to grace, he can change his nature. He can cease to be a creature and begin to become even a child of God. Now, studiousness is related, I wonder if you could guess the virtue to which that is related. Temperance. Temperance, because Thomas Aquinas says we have 3 great passions and urges and inclinations. One is to eat. The other is sex. And the other is for knowing. Everybody's curious, men just as well as women. That's the reason we hate to have secrets kept from us. We were made to know. Now, these 3 urges can become abnormal. Food can become gluttony, sex can become adultery, and knowing can become pride. Hence the necessity of temperance to prevent us, one, from having too little, and on the other hand, from having too much. If, for example, we have too little, well, then we become lowbrows. Now, a lowbrow, of course, does not develop himself. If we do not develop our muscles begin to atrophy. And there is in us, there is in the universe, not only an evolution, but there's also a law of devolution. That is to say, we can not only go up, but we can also go back. A white fence does not always remain a white fence. Leave it alone and it ceases to be white. It may even become a black fence. Darwin tells the story of a number of pigeons that were brought by a bird fancier to a very high degree of perfection of color. And then he turned them loose on an island and went back and found that in 10 years they had all changed into a dull gray slate color. They had degenerated. So it's possible for the mind to degenerate. It has been established statistically, think of this, that 61% of the adults of the United States during the past year did not read a single book. Do you know how much time the average adult spends on television? He spends 3 hours and 20 minutes a week on TV. These same adults, 50% of these same adults that spend 3 hours and 20 minutes before TV, 50% of them had not read a magazine article during the year. 25% of college students had not read a book the year after graduation. Something wrong with education when it does not inculcate a desire for learning. So just as there can be lowbrows, so over here you can have eyebrows. His learning always exceeds his knowledge. Now, a highbrow's knowledge is generally due to over-specialization, or rather his knowledge tends to over-specialization. He concentrates on just one thing and interprets everything in terms of that one specialty. His knowledge is not universal. I heard of a young man who had finished medicine. He went home to his father, who was a doctor in a small town, took care of all kinds of diseases. And the young son doctor said to his father, he said, "Dad," he said, "you know, we learned in medical school that this is an age of specialization. And he said, you get nowhere today unless you specialize in something, and I've decided to specialize in the nose." And the father said, "Which nostril?" Darwin confessed to the ill effects of specialization. He said, "I've spent my life in one specialty of science," and he said, "I'm very sorry to say now that at the end of my days I've lost all appreciation for poetry and art and good literature, which I enjoyed when I was young and in the university." H.G. Wells once wrote a fantasy on the moon men. He called them the sea lights. And he pictured them all as developing one organ that was in accordance with their specialty. For example, those who just studied music and refused to learn anything else besides music, they were all ears. Glass blowers were nothing but lungs. And chemists had long noses. And scientists were carried around in sedan tubs. They were nothing but globs of intellectual jelly. And one of the ill effects of becoming a highbrow, and this is another mark of him, is he has no use for the common people. That's when knowledge begins to spoil you. When you've lost touch with the common man. Horace, the Roman poet, was that way. He said, I hate the common crowd, and I avoid them. Now these are the two extremes of studiositas. Now let us suppose now that we concentrate on how to improve the mind by a proper use of the virtue of temperance. There are three suggestions. The first suggestion is, in all reading and in all study, taste. Look at everything you read as you might look at a lollipop. Hold it on a stick. See what flavor it has. Maybe it's not worth reading. Just think, we are full of hygiene laws. We have individual cups for drinking and so forth. And we're protected. If anything gets on our cranberries, we'll not eat them. But garbage for the mind? Anything. We'll pour in all the filth that we please. As one publisher said when someone brought him a very good novel, he said, I know, he said, this is a marvelous novel, but this year we're looking for trash. So you taste. Now, there are some things that are, once you taste them, you see, well, they're not worth bothering with. Too much. They're all right as a taste, recreational reading. Take, for example, an exclusive diet of novels and TV. When people just sit glued to a TV drama in which emotions are provoked and evoked. The emotions of love and hate and jealousy and fear and dread and anxiety and so forth. As we turn over the pages of the novel, we become more and more stirred. And as we listen to the Westerner and we see that man with the white hat on, and there are 50,000 bullets are shot through that white hat, all the black hats, they're knocked everywhere, but that white hat never comes off his head. And you become so full of dread that maybe someday that man's going to lose his white hat. What would happen to the world? And what are all these emotions directed against? Fictitious characters. A book. Paper. Why can't you see that after a while our emotions are like the spring on a screen door? Pulled and pulled so often that after a while it loses all of its resiliency. And then later on in life, there come real objects and problems toward which the emotions of love and hate and anger and justice and so forth should be aroused. But they become so jaded, so exhausted, so emasculated by being pulled at artificially that they're no longer aroused. And that is why in the face of social injustices, dishonesties, affecting one industry after another and politics, we remain cold. Our emotional life is gone. That's one of the evil effects of too steady a diet. And students, when they go to colleges, should only taste certain courses. Go in the first day. If the professor does nothing but sit and dictate notes to you, quit the course. Then there are certain courses that are not worth following. Statistics of the year. They'll be useless next year. Some courses on sociology. You could get more out of a book in a hammock in an hour than you can out of a course of that kind in 6 months. Taste them. If you do not like them, throw them aside. Then next, chew. When we get hold of something good and we masticate it in order to take out of it all the flavor that is there. Now this chewing means that we are not always just looking at the book. We first of all have to put forth considerable effort. There is no such thing as an easy path to knowledge. Do not believe these advertisements. Learn to speak French in 40 easy hours. Calculus, learned in an afternoon. Learn how to play the piano in 10 easy lessons. Buy an electric organ, sit down, play it at once. Just try it sometime. So we're looking for everything easy. We do not read books. We've got to get hold of a digest. Everything has to be broken up for us. We're not putting forth any effort. The other day when I came into the studio, I found a cover on a book. Fortunately, it was only a cover, but it very well illustrates the flight from effort today in studying. Do you know what it was called? Brain Surgery Self-Taught. So we are not, therefore, always to be looking at the book. We have to get away from it and meditate on it. What I do with my books is, when I get a book, I read it through fairly quickly. I underline the important passages. That's chewing out the meat. And then I read it over the second and third time. And then I will make in the back an index of my own, so that when I want to refer to those ideas, I have my own index ready. Now, you cannot do that with borrowed books. Anatole France said that the only books he had in his library were those that were borrowed. Then the third way to improve your mind is to digest certain kinds of books. Now, digest does not mean a summary. When there is such a thing as digestion, there is a flow of the food and nutrient value into flesh, into blood, into bones, and into the brain. When, therefore, we digest books, we learn, as it were, from the inside out, not from the outside in, not from the book in this way. We will read the book, then we close it, and we try to rethink what we have read. The longer we keep our eyes on that book, the less we will get it into our head. Try to give an example of something. You'll never understand anything until you can give an example. Think of the people who write speeches. Then when they've written a speech, what will they do? They will sit down and learn that speech by heart. Just think, they'll make a living mind, made to the image and likeness of God, subservient to a piece of paper. Why, what's written on that paper can be made better by thinking it over and over again. It's often wondered how I can get up here and talk for a half hour and not use an idiot card or a teleprompter. It's really very simple. Just simply get ideas into your head. Now, I brought over tonight, there is the telecast of tonight, right there on that yellow paper. It's written in flesh and blood and inside out. Now, I've got pyramid here. The reason I'm not touching on pyramids and on quiz shows is because I don't have time. But I don't get nervous about it, you see. I remember once asking Cardinal Mercier, when I left the University of Louvain in Belgium, I said, I may have to teach someday. What's the best way to teach? He says, tear up your notes at the end of every year. And I did that for 25 years. You have eyes, and I have eyes. But the light is not in our eyes. The light is outside of us. We have the same eyes at night as we have in the day. We cannot see at night because we lack the additional light of the sun. And so, too, for the understanding of many things, we have to appeal to the light that is outside of us, namely the light of God. That is one of the reasons why I have in my house, I've got about 8,000 books. Our house is only 25 feet wide, and so I've got them everywhere. Now, this library here is the simulation of my own study. Well, my desk is here, and books on either side of me, and shelves, and then at the far end is a door, and that door leads to the tabernacle, to the chapel. And I deliberately put my desk here in order that I may get my illumination from the Lord. There's a world of difference between knowledge and wisdom. One can have a lot of knowledge and have no wisdom. You can know without being moral. In order to have wisdom, you have to be good. That's the reason. Never go to a psychiatrist who's divorced or is not leading a good life. He can't give you any wisdom. He can never help you. And so when divine wisdom came down to this earth, who are the people who came to have their minds improved? Two classes, shepherds wise men. And the wise men found what every student wants, the wisdom of God.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees.
He was the son of a farmer who entered the clergy in 1919, and on his way to becoming an archbishop, he wrote more than 60 books and attracted a long list of followers. But most of us will remember Bishop Sheen as a television personality.
In life is worth living. And now, His Excellency, Bishop Fulton J. Sheen.
His most popular series, Life is Worth Living, attracted a weekly audience of up to 30 million and won him an Emmy Award in 1952. His sense of humor was definitely a strong part of his magnetism. Take, for example, this comment about his television ratings.
And we telephoned 1,000 men. And we asked the question, what are you listening to? 994 answered, my wife.
In 1966, Sheen arrived in Rochester to succeed the Reverend James Carney as bishop of the local diocese. Names such as Gordon Howe, Vincent Toffany, and Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Wilson were there to greet him. At his very first local news conference, he talked about his appointment.
I have been responsible for keeping and helping 800 dioceses in the world. Now I will be responsible for one, but I'll be much more responsible.
When asked how he might handle any problems in the local diocese, he responded with a short parable of sorts.
Because it's very much like a third baseman coming to a new club and you say, well, now, how are you going to play the first ball? He will say, well, it all depends upon how it's hit.
Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen will be remembered worldwide, but he will always be the subject of special memories here in Rochester. The local ecumenical movement made progress by his very existence. Because of his international reputation, Catholic and non-Catholic alike claimed him as their own. No one could ask for a more fitting epitaph.
I came across a quote from you from, 4 years ago, more than that, in which you said that you prayed that you dropped dead before you were 80 because you probably could not work at full schedule. Thank God your prayers were not answered. But now that you're 84, you're going to try for 90?
No. No, please God, I don't want to live that long. The reason I prayed to die at 80 was because I felt that my usefulness would be finished. But it isn't. And so I'm happy to work, and I'm happy to go to heaven, and when I get there, I'll ask the good Lord to send me back after a few days of happiness there to come down and do some more work here.
What is it you're doing now?
I'm writing my own autobiography. It is called Clay. That is to say, the clay refers to me. The treasure in clay is the vocation.
Bishop Sheen, do you foresee in the distant future any change in the Church's stand, the Catholic Church's stand, and certain issues today which have been quite controversial? Certainly abortion has been. Do you foresee ever any change in that?
No.
Not at all?
No, because we have no power over the divine law. Furthermore, suppose we did. Suppose John Paul II tomorrow said, all right, bring out your contraceptives. Pull out your scalpels. Unplug the children from their wombs. Marry as you please. Unmarry as you please. Fornicate as you please. What would be the difference between the church and the world?
But meanwhile, Bishop Sheen, you do have many women who have had abortions, who go to church.
Yes, there's no reason why they shouldn't go to church and pray the good Lord will forgive them. That's good. I'm glad they do.
I mean, better that if they're going to have an abortion that they still go to church than not at all.
Yes, exactly.
How do you see children and being able to teach human values to children? How do you teach them right from wrong when they see otherwise around them?
First of all, children have within themselves a built-in comprehension of right and wrong. In the beginning of their lives, everything is baby hurt. After a while, they distinguish between the fire and themselves. And it isn't wrong until they distinguish between things that the parents approve and things that they do not. This idea of saying, leave the children be free, let them grow up to do whatever they want, then they will decide. Why do we have pot training?
When we talk about the family, Bishop Sheen, are you distressed by the fact that in many cases you have men and women living together without marriage?
Yes, and principally because it is the destruction of love. Unfortunately, in English, we have only one word for love. So we have to say, I love pickles, I love the New York Mets, I love God. The Greeks had 3 words for it. And 2 of them that were important were eros, which was friendship love, when Freud made the erotic, or sex. Then there's the agape, sacrificial love. Now when you're speaking of the family and these new customs that have sprung up, we have only eros, the erotic love. We have a love in which the ego projects itself into another and says, I love you, when all that is loved is the pleasure that is found in the other person. And this kind of love is the destruction of the family and the destruction of the human person. As a matter of fact, I believe one of the reasons why we have so much neuroses and psychoses is this tremendous affirmation of the self. I gotta do my thing. I have to have my pleasure. You bend yourself to my will. When real love does not mean to have and to own and to possess. It means to be had, to be owned, to be possessed. The ancients were right in giving Cupid an arrow, something that wounds, something that sacrifices self for another. Do these people ever show love, for example, for their neighbor and for the downtrodden? No, it is generally for the satisfaction of self. So this kind of life is producing neurotics and psychotics in our civilization.
You mean more so than ever?
More so than ever, yes. People today are without goals and without purposes. That is one of the reasons why our civilization is erotic. We try to make the intensity of a sex experience atone for a want of a purpose in life. Just as when we're lost in an automobile, we drive faster.
Take your average woman in mid-30s, say, who is a mother, a wife. She's bored, she's restless. You say that she is likely or would regard a sexual experience as something that might fulfill her?
One, I would say nothing about that particular woman, but she has something that can give her a passion. That's the raising of children. Believe me, she's got some arrows that she has to shoot. And she'll be held responsible whether or not those arrows ever hit the mark.
Well, what can you say to that woman, though, to make her aware of this, what you're saying about raising those children? Because the tendency is to say, oh, I can't wait to get out of the house, away from children. I'm so tired of children underfoot.
All right. What do you say to anybody, not just that woman? What do you say to anybody?
Yeah.
What do you want? Why are you bored? You want three things. If you could take your heart out as a kind of crucible and distill out of it its inmost cravings, what would they be? One, you want life. Not for 5 more minutes. Not for 5 more years. What else do you want? You want truth. Not just what you read in the paper. Truth of geography, literature, science, everything. We hate to have secrets kept from us. Thirdly, what do you want? Love. And a love without satiety. A love without fed-upness. A love that is constant. That's what you want. Now, do you find them here? Do you find life here? No. Why? Because life is mingled with its shadow death. We get old. Truth, that's mingled with the shadow error. Love, that is mingled with the shadow hate and satiety. So here we are in this rat race. Something we want, something we can't find. What's the answer? Are we to say life is a mockery? Or are we to say, as we might in this room, what's the source of light? Not under the chair, there's light is mingled with shadow. Not behind the bookcases, there light is mingled with darkness. We would say as logical beings, well, source of light, I have to go out to something that's pure light. So, if you want a life, and a truth and a love, a life that is not mingled with the shadow death, and a truth that is not mingled with the shadow error, and a love that is not mingled with the shadow hate, you want pure life, pure truth, pure love. That's what you want. That's only a definition of God. And when you want that, you have everything, and then everything fits in place.
So what you're saying is that we've been too permissive.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Hoping that the children will like us, and they don't. That's the penalty of being permissive. There is nothing that helps develop character of a child as much as a pat on the back, provided it is given hard enough, low enough, and often enough.
Is this how you were raised?
I had one spanking, only one in my life. We had a horse, and I was a boy, Morgan. We kept in a barn back of our home in Peoria. And I was to feed the horse every noon. And I would go out and cut off some of the hay that was in a bale and feed it down the chute to Morgan. And my father came home this noon and said, "Did you feed the horse?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I was just out there. There wasn't any hay in the bin." And I said, "Well, I fed the horse." And evidently Morgan was hungry that day and ate it all. So he gave me a spanking for lying. My mother said to my father, "No, he fed the horse. I saw him." Well, my father said, "Well, that spanking will do for the next time." But I never received another.
Is modern man far from peace? No one is dangerously unhappy except the individual who does not know what happiness means. Life is unbearable only to those who are ignorant of why they are alive. Men in such a condition of soul equate happiness with pleasure, which is a very different matter, and identify joy with a tingling of the nerve endings, which it is not. But things which are external to us never bring us inner peace. The more persistently anyone looks for satisfaction, and a goal to serve in something outside of his control, the less stable he will find it. The more subject he will be to disappointments. There are two movements towards happiness. The first of these is our withdrawal from the outside, from too great an absorption in the things of the world. The second movement is far more profound. It is an ascension from what is inferior within us to what is its superior, from our egotism to our God. Modern man has experienced the first movement. Exterior things have become so many sources of misery to him. Wars, depressions, the insecurity and emptiness of life have so terrified men that they have tried to close off their contacts with the outside world and have begun to seek for satisfactions in their own limited selves. That is why psychiatry is having such a field day. The modern soul, alarmed at what it finds without, has drawn down the shades and begun to look for contentment in analyzing its own unconsciousness, anxieties and fears, its doldrums and frustrations. But such self-containment can prove a prison if one is locked into it with his own ego alone, for there is no more confining straitjacket in the world than that of the self left to itself. The cure never lies in using a psychoanalytic scalpel to release the inner moral pus and watch it flow. That is a morbid act for both the patient and the doctor. The cure, rather, consists in discovering why one is lonely and afraid of solitude, for most people have a dread of being alone, without knowing why the prospect frightens them. The problem of our day is this problem of finding interior peace, and it is in this that the 20th century is marked off from the 19th. 100 years ago, men looked to the exterior world for the answers to their problems. They worshipped science or nature, expected happiness to come from progress or politics or profits. The 20th century man is worried about himself. He is even more concerned over the problem of sex than by sex itself, is interested in the mental attitude he should take towards it, rather than in its physical satisfaction and the begetting of children. His own values, moods, and attitudes absorb him. Although a great deal of nonsense has been written about the interior life of men in our day, it is still true that the 20th century is closer to God than the 19th century was. We are living on the eve of one of the great spiritual revivals of human history. Souls are sometimes closest to God when they feel themselves farthest away from Him, at the point of despair. For an empty soul, the divine can fill; a worried soul, the infinite can pacify. A self-concerned, proud soul, however, is inaccessible to grace. Modern man has been humiliated. Neither his proud expectations of progress nor of science have turned out as he hoped. Yet he has not quite reached the point of humbling himself. He is still imprisoned in the self, and able to see nothing else beyond. The psychoanalysts may be allowed to bore into his thoughts for a few years more, but the time is not far off when modern men will utter a frantic appeal to God to lift them from the empty cistern of their own egos. St. Augustine knew it well, he said. Our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee, and that is why, although a catastrophic war may threaten us, the times are not as bad as they seem. Modern man has not yet returned to God, but he has at least returned to himself. Later he will surpass and transcend himself with God's grace, which he is seeking. Even now, no one ever looked for something unless he knew that it existed. Today the frustrated soul is looking for God, as for the memory of a name he used to know. The difference between those who have found God in faith and those who are still seeking Him is like the difference between a wife, happy in the enjoyment of her husband's companionship, and a young girl wondering if she will ever find a husband, and perhaps trying to attract men by the wrong approach. Those who search for pleasure, fame, and wealth are all seeking the infinite, but the seekers are still on the outskirts of the eternal city. Those with faith have penetrated to their real home within the infinite and have found the peace which the world cannot give. As one can see a figure far off and not yet recognize him as a long-lost friend, so one can sense the need of the infinite and desire the endless ecstasy of love, but not yet know that it is God. It makes no difference how wicked a soul may be. There is no one subjecting himself to illicit pleasures who does not have a consciousness of his subjection and his slavery. Perhaps that is why alcoholics are often liars. Their lips deny a slavery which their lives so visibly witness. Such individuals, unwilling to admit themselves mistaken, still refuse to be convinced of divine truth, but their sadness and their emptiness will eventually drive them to the God of mercy. Our exterior world today is in desperate straits, but the inner world of man is far from hopeless. The world of politics and economics lags behind the psychological development of men themselves. The world is far from God, but human hearts are not. That is why peace will come less from political changes than from man himself, who, driven to take refuge within his own soul from the turmoil without, will be lifted above himself to the happiness for which he was made.
This week we received probably the prime compliment of all. A lady in great seriousness told me that her dog always refused to leave the room while I was on television. My program is probably the only one on television that has gone to the dogs. I understand that the dog was a St. Bernard. He's giving up his liquor license for Lent. Perhaps we can introduce this subject by telling you the story of someone in the South who was arraigned before the judge, and the judge said to him, "Sam, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" And he says, "Judge, if you're going to put me under those limitations, I haven't a word to say." And so there are people who believe there are no limitations, that the philosophy of self-expression is always right, and that repression of any kind, asceticism, self-denial, mortification, all of these things end in a frustration of personality. Now, because the philosophy of self-expression is so very general in our land, may we analyze it and ask, is self-expression always right? In order to answer the question, one must begin by making a distinction. Now, self-expression can refer to one of two things. It can refer to something, for example, that is simple, or it can refer to something that is complex. A thing is simple, for example, when it produces only one effect. It is complex when it produces many effects. Now, self-expression is always right when it refers to something simple. For example, a bedbug has a perfect right to self-expression. So has a flea. So has fire, so has water, so has ice. When you get into something that is complex, and therefore capable of producing several effects, well, self-expression may not always be right. It may sometimes be wrong. Now, let us take some examples of complex things. For example, is a locomotive more self-expressive when it is on the track or when it is off the track? Is a razor more self-expressive when it shaves the beard or when it cuts the face? Or take a cold, a common cold. Now, many people have colds, and you are asked, "How is your cold?" You say, "Oh, my cold is terrible." No, the cold is a cold may not be terrible. The cold is a cold may be very good. You may be terrible as a result of the cold. Because inasmuch as you have the cold now, we're dealing with a certain amount of complexity. And I can imagine very well a doctor being called in, and you say, "Doctor, will you please care for me?" And the doctor says, "You know, as I examine your flu germs, I want to tell you that you have a particularly fine culture of germs. I do not believe that in my life I have ever seen germs in better and more complete development than they are in you. And being a scientist, I am in favor of self-expression. I therefore am going to develop this flu within you in order to study all of the effects. Oh, I know that you want me to cure you. You say that your health is more important. Now that means I have to repress these germs. Do you realize that? As regards your health being more important, well, Einstein says everything is relative. It's purely a question of relativity. For my part, I'm going to express my love of germs. Is it really that simple? Was the doctor right in being that self-expressive? Or were you right in insisting on your health? Now, inasmuch as we are dealing, therefore, with something complex, because we are dealing with man's complexity derives from the fact that he's composed of a body and a soul. Matter and spirit. And the two do not always get along together. They may sometimes get along together like many a husband and a wife in a home. Not so well. And if you concentrate all the time on the body, well, the soul may suffer. If you concentrate all the time on the soul, the body itself may suffer. For example, have you ever in your life known an athlete, a great athlete, who was also a specialist in mathematical calculus? Have you ever known, for example, a man who became an expert in Hittite civilization? Whoever won the American Open Golf Championship? I heard of a college, incidentally, that next year was going to have 3 football teams. One for offense, the other for defense, and the third to attend classes. Did you ever know a very athletic girl who was strong enough to do indoor housework? Benjamin Franklin said he knew a man who developed his mind so very much that he knew the name of a horse in 9 languages, but he bought a cow to ride. It's impossible for us to concentrate on one without the other suffering to some extent. It has been said, you know, that if a priest plays golf under 80, a score of 80, there's something wrong with his priesthood. If he plays above 80, there's something wrong with his golf. Now, inasmuch as we are very complex, we are to some extent like a man on a teeter-totter. Long time since I've drawn a man for you, and I've not improved one bit in 4 years. Not a particle. Now it happens that when, for example, a man represses his love of self, that his sense of solidarity and community goes up. Many a wife has said, for example, of a drinking husband, he's so wonderful when he doesn't drink. So if he represses drink, there's an elevation of his home life. Take, for example, going to a picnic. If you repress the ants, you've got a good picnic. Who was it that said, denied that ants were the busiest creatures in the world and the hardest workers? He said they weren't hard workers at all because he always saw them at picnics. If we repress, therefore, the flesh, it follows that the spirit is going to be elevated. I believe, for example, that every single person in the world has actually got just so much energy. Now, not everybody has the same amount of energy. Some have tremendous powers. And if these powers go in the direction of evil, they're going to do a great deal of harm in the world. If they go in the direction of good, they will be benefactions to humanity. Now let us take, for example, a person who has, say, not very much energy, say 10 ergs of energy. There's 10 ergs of energy. And he goes in the direction of virtue. Well, suppose he turned around and went in the direction of vice. How vicious would he be? The chances are he'd be just about that vicious. I'll take a person who has much more energy. That particular person goes in the direction of virtue, produces a great quantity of it. That person went in the direction of vice, he would indeed be very vicious. There, I believe, is the great difference between Lenin and St. Francis. I mean Lenin, who introduced communism into Russia. If Lenin had gone in the direction of virtue instead of hate, violence, and revolution, he would have been a St. Francis of Assisi. And if a St. Francis of Assisi had gone the same direction of Lenin, he would have been a Lenin. Almighty God can deal with people who have a great deal of force and passion. That was one of the reasons, I think, why he loved Paul. Paul could hate. Not simply because Paul could hate, he had a tremendous capacity for love. The passion of Mary Magdalene was never killed. The passion of Mary Magdalene was just simply turned into another direction. And very fittingly, therefore, she's been called the 13th apostle. The 13th apostle simply because she has done so very much good by turning all of this energy around. The little flower, now the little flower is not LaGuardia. The little flower was the saint, St. Teresa. St. Teresa said that if she had followed her passions and had not in some way repressed that which was evil within her and had not responded to God's grace, she probably would have been one of the most evil women who ever lived. That's easy enough to understand. In other words, you never have a self-expression of something without a repression of something else. You never have a repression without a self-expression. That's why it's ridiculous to say of complex beings that self-expression is always right. If you put heat into a room, you repress the cold. Elevate yourself in the direction of goodness, you must depress vice. There must be some kind of asceticism and mortification and self-discipline. When then is self-expression right? Well, self-expression is right when it is directed to that which is the highest in our being. For example, when the mind is directed to truth, when the will is directed to goodness, when the body is more important than the raiment, and the whole being is directed to God, where the personality is also directed to its duty. And self-expression is always to be praised. And then it aids in what is called self-possession. Otherwise, we are possessed by something that is outside of us. And that is why, incidentally, our blessed Lord said, if your eye scandalizes you, pluck it out and cast it away. If your hand scandalizes you, cut it off and cast it away. It was not that our blessed Lord recommended an incomplete body, but rather he said sometimes that which is lower and base will stand in the way of that which is higher. And just as a ship in a storm at sea must be prepared to sacrifice its cargo, so too we must be prepared to sacrifice the lower things in order to possess the higher. That is why all of our games are made of obstacles. Do you not think it would be far much easier, for example, for a pole vaulter to run under the pole instead of going over it on a pole? Wouldn't it be much easier for basketball players if the baskets were down about 6 feet? Take, for example, golf. There's rough, and then the sand traps. The sand traps. I remember some years ago, I was in the Sahara Desert, great expanse of sand, and the guide said to me, he said, do you know what that is? I said, sure, I know what it is. But where's the green? That was the only part of the golf course I knew. All right, now we've been saying that in order to express the best of our personality, we must in some way mortify that which is lower. It may be objective. Then you're opposed to pleasure. Then we are not to have a good time. Then the long face is recommended. Then you pervert life. It may be objected. And you begin to take a pleasure, really a pleasure in giving yourself pain. Is that true? No, those who make that statement, first of all, they do not understand what real asceticism, mortification, and self-discipline are. Remember that our blessed Lord said, when you fast, wear not a long face. Anoint your head. Wash your face. Appear to men not to fast. It is also worth observing, and this is interesting. Suppose I just ask you the question. Can you ever recall in the gospel where our blessed Lord ever sang? Now, he came on earth primarily to die, to offer himself for the sins of the world. When did he sing? The night that he went out to his death. It was the only time he ever sang a song. Was that denying pleasure? Christian asceticism is not the same as the Oriental asceticism that sits on spikes and walks on fire. Why? Because that type of asceticism considers mortification and pain as an end in itself. It is not an end in itself. And if you make it an end in itself, you are perverting it. God takes no glory in pain as pain. And mortification as mortification. What is the inspiration of it then, if it is not just the seeking of self-restraint for the purposes of self-restraint? Well, the reason for all asceticism and mortification is love. Love. What a man loves is always the measure of his happiness. No man ever made an affirmation of love without at the same time making a negation of something else. When we love something, we are willing to dispense with all that stands in the way of that which we love. That is why, for example, a man who loves vice cannot bear the talk of religion. His love is elsewhere. The man who loves virtue, repelled by vice. See how many lives are changed when a new love comes into them. For example, a baby in a home. Look at all the sacrifice a baby inspires. Mother and father, the husband and wife would certainly never get up at 3 o'clock in the morning just for the fun of it. And maybe it was the first time that maybe the husband ever got up at 3 o'clock in the morning for the sake of a bottle, but he gets up. Then they stay at home at nights. They deny themselves certain clothes and even food in order that this new life of theirs may prosper. was love that inspired the sacrifice. When a man loves a woman, he gives her a ring of gold. Why? It represents a sacrifice. The day that men forget that love is synonymous with sacrifice, they will ask, what kind of a cruel and ruthless creature was that woman to have asked for a ring of gold instead of tin? It's the day that men forget that love is synonymous with sacrifice, they will ask, what kind of a God is it that asks for mortification and self-denial? When young people are in love, one will ask the other, do you like me in red? Maybe the girl will say to the boy will say to the girl, how do you like my hair? Do you like it when I have my hair standing on end like frills upon the fretful porcupine? Would you rather have my hair brushed back? Why? Simply because one wishes to satisfy love. Now take, for example, like dieting and fasting. What's the difference between dieting and fasting? You lose 20 pounds either way. Materially, there's no difference. You diet simply because you love your body. You fast because you love your soul. That's the only difference. The only way, therefore, we can show love of God is simply by getting rid of those things that weigh us down and prevent the flight to God. Why not, therefore, for example, in season of Lent rolls around, we'll give up the cocktail. Send me the 50 cents now, send it to the poor of India. That's a good idea. Give up one package of cigarettes. Give up one package of cigarettes a week. Send me the 25 cents now, send it to 80,000 of our lepers that we're caring for. Just give up one movie a week. Now send it to some of the refugees in Vietnam. And then you'll show a certain amount of love. This is the world problem, actually. I'm making it very simple. But the difference between the civilization of the West and the civilization of the East is this. This is our Western civilization. We have a love without sacrifice, without self-restraint, without any mortification. Communism, on the contrary, is a sacrifice without love. A love without sacrifice is what? A love without sacrifice is sentimentalism, romanticism. It is softness. It is the rotting of our nation. What is a sacrifice without love? It is violence. It is tyranny. It is hate. It is the totalitarian state. We have to beware of this, reminding ourselves of what Toynbee said, that of 19 civilizations that have perished from the beginning of the world until the present time, 16 have perished from within. They died of softness. It could very well be that in a struggle just on the natural order alone, that Russia might be stronger because it believes in discipline, believes in sacrifice, believes in a certain amount of negation, self-negation in order to attain its ends. But that must not be so, and that will not be so, provided we who know something about the cross in our civilization will introduce self-discipline, mortification, self-restraint in our home, in our nation, in our schools, that we may bring peace to a tortured world. Bye now, and God love you.
People of all faiths recognize Bishop Fulton J. Sheen as one of the greatest communicators of the 20th century. He was born in El Paso, Illinois, in May of 1896. As a young boy, he knew he wanted to be a priest. He served as an altar boy at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria, Illinois. At St. Viator College, his education and debating skills taught him the skills he used throughout his life. His unique ability at being natural and at ease in front of any audience was noted early in his ministry. He was ordained in 1919 and went on to become one of the best-known and greatly loved priests in church history. He wrote 96 books and hundreds of articles and columns. He broadcast numerous radio and TV programs. People from all faiths watched him on television because he spoke to every man. They always waited with joy for his goodbye, his blessing, God love you. It continues to give us joy and memories.
Bye now, and God love you.
Bishop Fulton J. Sheen went to be with the Lord in December of 1979. Fulton J. Sheen, requiescat in pace.